They don't know anything about him because that's by design, because Kalen DeBoer has chosen not to reveal anything of his personality and not to reveal anything about his opinions about the team or coaching football. He doesn't feel like talking. That's not who he is. And there's good parts of that and there's bad parts of that. And the bad parts are that when people feel confused about the direction of the program, they're not going to feel any better when they hear from the head coach, because you're choosing not to give them any guidance or any sense of confidence that the people in charge know what they're doing. That's why talking and being good at press conferences is actually an asset to a head coach. People love to dismiss it and they say it's all about X's and O's and on the field. It matters if you're good at press conferences.
Beat Everyone is brought to you by Broadway Joe's Fantasy Sports, inspired by football legend Joe Namath. Embrace the thrill of daily fantasy sports like never before in a new app coming soon. Welcome to Beat Everyone. I'm Ben Flanagan. It was far from perfect in Bryant-Denny Stadium on Saturday, but the saying always goes, a win is a win. And this is just me, but I'll always take an ugly win over any loss. And it's just what the doctor ordered for Alabama. This team a week after a stunning upset to Vanderbilt in Nashville. But regardless of the W, and before we look ahead to a monster game in Knoxville in what is affectionately known as Tennessee Hate Week, we need to be honest about what we're seeing from the Crimson Tide right now. And to help us do that this week, we welcome AL.com columnist, author of We Want Bama, fashion guru, Joe Goodman. Joe, welcome to the show.
Yes.
We're also joined by Matt Scalisi, Beat Everyone producer. But Joe, welcome, man.
Yeah, man. Great to be on. I got my Coach DeBoer hoodie. I'm rocking. I'm in with the times. It's the new trend in Alabama.
Yeah, that's what I'm afraid of, Joe. Let's begin with how I ended that intro, fashion. Something that the entire Alabama fan base and college football world care deeply about, maybe even care the most about, some would say. And we talked about it here. Kalen DeBoer wore a T-shirt while coaching from the sideline in Nashville last week. It sparked a lot of conversation. It inspired a couple of Joe Goodman columns. And you wrote, DeBoer looked like Cousin Eddie won tickets to the Alabama game at the last minute. You said DeBoer looked like an unseasoned chicken breast stuffed inside an old shoe. But you said that all jokes aside, that regardless of what a lot of people might think or say, a head coach's appearance actually means something to the people in this state. Joe, Kalen DeBoer can wear a T-shirt, he could wear a tuxedo and a top hat, and nobody thinks it directly impacts the results on the field. And it's really just something that's fun to talk about or maybe deflect from what happened in Nashville. But in the grand scheme of it all, why do you think it really does matter to people what Kalen DeBoer is wearing on the sideline?
Because they lost. Kalen DeBoer, he could show up with no shirt on and beat Tennessee by 50, and everyone would be totally fine with that. I mean, come on. All of a sudden, you want to tell me everyone in Alabama suddenly cares about fashion and what the college football coach is wearing? No, it's just a byproduct of them losing. Everyone is mad. Everyone wants to point the blame somewhere. This guy looks like he just repped out 50 push-ups before a football game and walked out on the field or something. People just didn't like anything they saw against Vanderbilt, and that included the T-shirt on the coach. And that's just such a beautiful example of the SEC bubble. I mean, things like that matter. They stand out, especially when everything's going bad. So welcome to the SEC. Your T-shirt matters, sir.
Matt, I mean, Joe in his column, he sees a combination of things wrong with Alabama right now. And, we talk about it in jest, about clothing, but, he wrote about Jalen Milroe's play, obviously the defensive issues, Alabama's lack of discipline, this tendency to make mistakes in key moments like critical penalties or busts in coverage. But Joe, you call those characteristics of an untucked and disheveled team going backwards. Matt, do you see any truth in what Joe is saying there, about the parallel between maybe what DeBoer is wearing? Again, we're kind of joking about that, but about how it sort of paints a picture of this Alabama team?
Well, there can be a lot of reasons why a team is not playing good football. And I think it's hard to boil it all down to a single thing. And I think also Kalen DeBoer clearly doesn't want to boil it down to a single thing. When you ask him questions in post-game press conferences after the Vanderbilt loss and after this very ugly game against South Carolina, he's not going to give you an easily digestible answer that makes anybody feel good about how fixable these issues are. He's going to say it was an individual, one-on-one matchup loss. It was a bunch of little things that all combined together. And that may in fact be true. I'm not saying it's not. It's not satisfying to the fans to hear at all. They want to hear that there's an overarching reason why things aren't.
I got a theory, Matt. I got a theory. Okay? I can tell you exactly what the heck is going on.
Go ahead.
Before Alabama played a mediocre or trash team, what did you know you were going to get out of Nick Saban on Monday? What did you absolutely know that you were going to get from Nick Saban on a Monday news conference before Vanderbilt?
Right,
what did you know that you were going to get?
He was gonna blow up. He was gonna come in with fire. Yeah.
Right. And why did he do that? He did that because he needed to get the team on edge. Everyone in that building needed to be scared, on edge, going into a game that could be a huge letdown. I'm not saying that DeBoer's a bad coach. He's a good coach. These players are used to playing for Nick Saban still. They're used to that weekly rhythm. So when you got a coach who comes in and he's even keeled the entire time, he's the same guy when he wins against Georgia as the same guy who when they lose against Vanderbilt or when they have a struggle win against the South Carolina. He's the same guy wearing a trash t-shirt, okay? That wasn't Nick Saban. Nick Saban was cool under pressure. Okay, go ask the players. Go ask any of those assistant coaches. When it was a big game, Nick Saban was the coolest dude in the building. All right? He wanted everyone to have that personality. Be focused. Then don't get too big for the moment, okay? But when it was a game that they needed to stay up for, he knew how to get the most out of his team. He raised that bar with those rants beginning on Monday with the press conference. And Nick Saban spoke to his team through the media. It's something that he did. That was one of the ways that he communicated with his football team. I mean, he did it behind closed doors too. But Nick Saban really got after his assistant coaches. Okay, that was his role on the team. He was a bad guy to the assistant coaches at all times. All right?
Right.
And
They're all traumatized. They're all traumatized by having worked for him anytime you talk to any of his former assistants.
It's completely different with the players, okay? But the assistant coaches would then coach the players. It was like brigade mentality. This coach's democracy is everything. That's what Kalen DeBoer is. And so he's even keeled throughout. He doesn't want to get too high, doesn't want to get too low. And the team is just not used to performing with a coach who motivates that way. And it might take a whole season. It might take getting in all new players, So at this point, that's my beat on everything.
All right, so let's go from the sideline to what we see on the field. And Joe, you wrote about how this Alabama football team doesn't yet know how to play for its new coach, Kalen DeBoer. You said, quote, with so much talent on the roster, Alabama's sudden mediocrity is one of college football's great mysteries for the first half of the season, end quote. So why is this such a mystery? Like you said, Alabama's loaded on the roster. They have a good quarterback in Jalen Milroe. The coach wins everywhere he goes. They're 5-1 in his first season, but those of us watching know that they haven't looked the part the last 2 weeks. What's wrong?
Because when you beat Georgia and then you lose to Vandy, it's hard to put a finger on anything. Everything went wrong for them to lose to Vandy. I mean, listen, I knew that Vandy was a good team going in. I knew that there was a chance that could happen. But at the same time, it's Vanderbilt, okay? And anytime anything crazy like that happens, people are going to look for the problems. Why? And, right now it's one of the biggest stories in college football. What's wrong with Alabama? Like you said at the beginning of the pod, bad struggle wins can be really good for a team in the long term. Losses, if they don't put you out of the playoff, they can be really good for a team in the long term. All those things are still capable for Alabama. Okay, but they're going to be tested this week in Tennessee. And I know that Tennessee's going to be there. They probably were down against Florida, maybe looking ahead a little bit to Alabama, but it's not going to be the same Tennessee that played against Florida that plays against Alabama.
Yeah, and Matt, I mean, a lot has rightly been made about the way Alabama finished the second quarter against South Carolina. And bear with me here, right? They're up 14-0. South Carolina marches down the field for a 10-play drive. It's 4th and 9. Lenora Sellers throws to a wide open receiver to cut the score in half. South Carolina kicks a touchback, but Caleb Odom has a personal foul. Jalen Milrose called for intentional grounding in the end zone. Suddenly, it's a safety, and it's 14-9, and Alabama punts it back to South Carolina. Alabama forces a fumble, some good fortune, and they burn some timeouts, try to do something on offense, but Jalen Milroe throws an interception to Jalen Kilgore, who steps out of bounds with 1 second left. South Carolina nails a field goal to cut it to 14-12 at the half. People are bewildered in Bryant-Denny Stadium. Fans are booing. And Joe wrote this. He said, if you've ever seen someone walk into a glass door, that's basically what happened to Alabama with less than 2 minutes to go in the first half, and things didn't get any better after that. So South Carolina gets the ball to start the half. They've got a go-ahead touchdown drive that lasts 16 plays. Alabama scores a couple of touchdowns in the fourth quarter. They survive a late touchdown. They survive a successful onside kick. Just an all-around messy game for them. And I want to do another Joe quote here. He said, Alabama didn't win so much as South Carolina found ways to blow it. So, Matt, you look at the rest of the schedule, they struggled for 3 quarters against South Florida. They beat a Wisconsin team without their starting quarterback. Georgia storms back in the second half and nearly wins that game. They lose to Vanderbilt, and they avoid catastrophe against South Carolina. Do you think Alabama's fortunate to be 5-1 right now?
I mean, based on South Carolina alone, they're fortunate. I've never seen. I can't think of many teams where I thought they're for sure gonna lose that many times, and they still won the game. I mean, I think one of the things you missed in that description of the game was also South Carolina missing a very makeable field goal that would have put them in the lead. It would have won the game for them. The last 2 games, I think if you want to look at it as everything went wrong for Alabama, I guess you could look at it that way. I'm the kind of person who believes that if that much goes wrong for you, whether it is on the football field, in your personal life, any of these things, at a certain point, you got to start asking yourself the question, am I the problem? Am I the reason this stuff keeps happening? It can't all be coincidence. Nobody's that unlucky. And I don't think that Vanderbilt got lucky to beat Alabama. What I saw was mostly they whooped Alabama's defense all day long. Alabama's defense looked like they had no shot at stopping Vanderbilt. Alabama's offense, especially their offensive line, for the last 2 weeks in a row, has looked totally lost and has had Jalen Milroe running for his life in the backfield. And frankly, he's not Bryce Young. He's not making great decisions when he's under pressure. There's no question the guy's an incredible athlete, and he can make great things happen with his legs. He does make great decisions sometimes too that lead to big plays. But when he's got somebody rushing at his face and the plan was to throw the ball, Jalen Milroe makes pretty bad decisions, and he's doing them consistently right now. I think I need somebody to explain to me why the Alabama we've seen the last 2 weeks is not who the team is, because that's what it looks like right now. I don't think this is just, boy, they had a bunch of crazy bad luck the last 2 weeks. This is sort of settling into who this team is, and teams can change their identity. They can figure things out. They can get better at things, but it hasn't happened since halftime of the Georgia game. They've been this team since then.
Okay. In defense of Jalen Milroe, all right, he's probably 1, 2, or 3, depending on who you talk to, best athletes in college football.
Sure.
All right. Last year, what happened against Tennessee? What happened last year against Tennessee?
Refresh my memory, Joe. I know Alabama won the game, but are you saying Jalen Milroe
Tennessee jumped out to a big lead early, and Alabama settled down.
Jalen Milroe became the best player in college football, and they stormed back and won the game.
Yeah.
Now, I love Jalen Milroe, but you're right, man. He has these aneurysms on the field that are just inexplicable. And you're like, what is going on now? You were so beautiful 2 seconds ago. It can all change, though. It can all change. And
I don't think he's the biggest. He's not this team's problem. Like
I'm not saying he's the problem.
He's the team's biggest. He's the team's biggest asset. You know, they win or lose with Jalen Milroe. I mean, with his, he's improved as a downfield I mean, he was already a good downfield passer. He's improved as a passer overall. I think he's a better quarterback this year than he was last year. You're right, though. I mean, I think the issue is that the mistakes that Milroe makes, when he makes them, are critical mistakes. They're turnovers a lot of the time. Yeah, turnovers against pick six, unlucky pick six against Vanderbilt, right? A really critical mistake in terms of the strip sack against Vandy when Alabama could be marching down for a go-ahead touchdown in that game in the second half. And then this week, obviously, he has turnovers too, where he keeps South Carolina in the game with a late interception in the second quarter. So he limits mistakes and he makes incredible plays, but when he makes mistakes, they're just so bad that he puts the team in a bad position. So they're going to have to figure that out. But Joe, I mean, you basically said that Alabama has cratered since the first half against Georgia. In that
Jalen has gotten worse. He has gotten worse.
Or he's been put in worse positions.
He's still a good player. Yeah. He's still a good player.
Right.
But he's been making critical mistakes. I mean, you have to say that he's gotten worse since Georgia. Since Georgia,
I think it's fine. And this is to your point here, right? That Alabama has just regressed since the first half of that game. And maybe 28-0 in the first half of that game is the anomaly, right? And that the team, not just Jalen Milroe, and we've obviously specified the defense, they're getting worse and worse by the week, right? And what may sting the most, Joe, is that you say Alabama shouldn't be considered a contender for the playoffs. Not right now. And really that the SEC has no business being represented by 4 teams in a college football playoff down the road, which could be how Alabama needs to find a berth into this playoff if the SEC has 4 teams. But you basically said forget the playoff. Alabama looks like it only might be good enough for a Music City Bowl. And if you're looking at the remainder of the schedule, like, where do we see more pitfalls? Like, I mean, what is the best case scenario? And is everything still on the table for Alabama right now?
Everything is absolutely still on the table. Like, we're not going to know anything about the playoffs until December, really. All right. But right now, if you had to find the 12 best teams in football, I'm sorry, Alabama's not one of them. But there's a lot of season left. Okay. Obviously, they could win against Tennessee. That's going to help their resume. They can continue to win. They'll be right there. Alabama with 1 loss going into the SEC championship game, that smells a lot like a playoff team to me, all right? But go back to the Vanderbilt game. There was nothing unlucky about Alabama in that game. That was, from the beginning to the end, Vanderbilt domination. Now, take Vandy, for example. And this is kind of what going back to the point that I meant, that players, when they're used to a coach, they know how to respond to a coach during the middle of a season. Vanderbilt lost to Georgia State, okay? Did they get better or worse? They've obviously gotten better. I mean, they did score 22 points in the fourth quarter against Georgia State. All right, so they weren't exactly terrible in that game, but they are a team that has been under Coach Clark Lee for several years now. They have the talent. They have a senior leader at quarterback. They know how to respond and get the most out of that team. Alabama is going the other way. Now, why is that? The reason, like I said, is because these players aren't used to the coaching yet.
Yeah, and I mean, if we look ahead to Tennessee now, Like, this was a game that many had circled on their calendar during the offseason, and especially after Alabama beat Georgia. Like, the playoff was right in front of them at that point, and they could afford a loss on the road to Tennessee. They weren't thinking about losing to Vandy, but each team has lost a game now between Alabama and Tennessee. So this becomes a must-win to ensure that each of them remain firmly in the playoff picture. And early on, Tennessee, they looked explosive under Josh Heupel. They put up a lot of points. But middle-of-the-pack SEC teams like Arkansas and Florida have either beaten them or exposed a pretty flawed team, even on offense. But we've seen effective game plans from Heupel against Alabama the last few years, including against those Nick Saban-coached teams. And an even bigger issue, as Joe wrote, is opposing offenses have given Kane Womack, the defensive coordinator at Alabama, major trouble the last 2.5 games. And you know, you said if he isn't just rusty over these past 2.5 games, Heupel could do a lot more damage in Knoxville. So, Matt, what do you see as the biggest concern going into this rivalry game?
I honestly think it's the other side of the ball. I think that Nico Iamaleava has had 2 pretty rough games here. I think he's maybe hitting a little bit of a wall as a young player. He's very talented, but I think he's clearly struggling right now. And that whole offense is I question the talent level of that receiver group. I don't know that they're what they were a couple of years ago. So I think that's part of why we've seen 2. I mean, Joe can tell you better than I could, I guess, if Florida is considered a decent defense. But Arkansas certainly is. Arkansas has a good defensive unit. And these 2 teams have really given Nico a lot of trouble in that Tennessee offense. Where I think the real problem is for Alabama here is they're going to go up against a very good front 7 for Tennessee. And that's what we've seen the last couple of weeks, and particularly this week against South Carolina. This Alabama offense does not deal well with pressure getting to the quarterback. This offensive line is struggling. I don't know what's going on. I don't know if it's a talent issue, a scheme. I mean, there was suggestions today that it's a scheme issue, according to the coaches, for the Alabama coaches, but they're not doing a great job of protecting Jalen Milroe. And this Tennessee defensive front is potentially the best group up front that Alabama's offense has seen this year. It's going to be a long day for Jalen Milroe, and they're going to have to figure out some ways for this offense to move the ball, even with Milroe getting pressure in his face, not having a lot of time to get rid of the ball, not having a ton of space to run the ball up the middle. It's going to be a challenge for the Alabama offense.
Yeah, their defensive line is loaded with NFL prospects. They are on par with Georgia's defensive line. It's an elite SEC defensive line. And, in theory, that is where Jalen Milroe's wheels will come in handy. He's so good at escaping the pocket and throwing downfield. And those are the type of plays that he makes time and time again. I assume that we're going to see some magic like that from Jalen Milroe against Tennessee. But like you said before, Matt, when it gets to be 3rd and long, when it gets to be 3rd and goal, yeah, what the heck is going to happen? Like, I'm so worried in those moments now. And I've been conditioned that way for 2 seasons.
Yeah, I think about that Tennessee game last year you mentioned where Alabama fell behind early. Tennessee was going fast, like really fast, faster probably to their detriment ultimately, but Alabama kept their composure. So did Jalen Milroe. And like you said, he emerged as a real quarterback, a guy that you could trust under pressure. Now, this is a very different team, very different offense, very different head coach, right, that you're playing for. But I think back even to like the LSU game last year when they trusted Jalen Milroe's instincts. They trusted his legs. They let him go. They turned him loose and said, hey, man, if the pocket is collapsing, go. If you see green field in front of you, go. We haven't seen a lot of that this year from Jalen Milroe. I mean, he's obviously developing pocket presence. He's developing as a downfield and intermediate passing game thrower. But I think like if Alabama wants to survive this schedule, they've got to depend on his athleticism. I mean, he is so gifted as a runner, but he is gifted just strictly as a playmaker too. The improvement that he's shown as a passer has got to be compounded with what he can do with his feet. But I just want to quickly ask about the bright side, right? Because despite a few costly turnovers, Jalen Milroe, I think, has played relatively well this year. The past couple of games maybe are exceptions, important exceptions, but I think overall he's had a good season. It wasn't that long ago that the guy was at the top of everybody's Heisman list. He's the odds-on favorite to win the Heisman, but things change week to week. As we know, it becomes what have you done for me lately. Ryan Williams is obviously a standout, arguably the best wide receiver in the country. Alabama has playmakers, and the offensive line has played pretty well. I mean, South Carolina had an elite pass rush, and they did fairly well. There were other parts of the protection that might have struggled with it, but Alabama is 5-1. They have one of the best wins on anybody's resume so far after beating Georgia. So what does a road win against Tennessee do for Kalen DeBoer in this Alabama team this week, Joe?
It reestablishes confidence, I think, in Alabama football. The pillars are shaking, okay? I don't care what their record is. If you lose to Vanderbilt, if you almost lose to South Carolina at home, there are problems inside the building. And so they need to come in, and I don't care how you win at Tennessee. You go up there, you win by half a point. It doesn't matter. But they need to go in there and get a win to reestablish some confidence in Alabama football.
Matt, Joe had a mailbag column this week where a reader named Debbie from Georgia said, quote, "God, I miss seeing Nick Saban on the sidelines, and I miss the respect my Crimson Tide used to have. How long is the university going to put up with this coach? This was a very bad decision," end quote. So let me repeat here. It's early, right? I mean, Kalen DeBoer is in his first season, but I mean, Gene Chizik won a national title in his second season 14 years ago. So expectations only get more and more unfair the further we go, and especially like with the emergence of the college football playoff and its expansion and how much easier it is for a team like Alabama to get in. But judging by the temperature out there among the fan base, like I said, there was booing in Bryant-Denny Stadium at halftime on Saturday. As irrational as it can get sometimes in end times like these, do we really already sense buyer's remorse, so to speak?
I don't know. I don't even really think it's about Kalen DeBoer that much, because I don't think that the average Alabama fan knows anything about Kalen DeBoer. In fact, I would venture to guess if you polled the people in the stadium, you'd get more than 5% of people who couldn't tell you the current head coach's name. That would be my guess. That's an unfair, wild estimate, but they don't know anything about him because that's by design, because Kalen DeBoer has chosen not to reveal anything of his personality and not to reveal anything about his opinions about the team or coaching football. He doesn't feel like talking. That's not who he is. And there's good parts of that and there's bad parts of that. And the bad parts are that when people feel confused about the direction of the program, they're not going to feel any better when they hear from the head coach, because you're choosing not to give them any guidance or any sense of confidence that the people in charge know what they're doing. That's why talking and being good at press conferences is actually an asset to a head coach. People love to dismiss it and they say it's all about X's and O's and on the field. It matters if you're good at press conferences.
Nick Saban's greatest asset was his ability as a communicator.
Right.
But that is why he was a good coach.
And I don't
care about X's and O's and blah, 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 blah. It doesn't matter. He was an excellent, elite communicator. Right. That's why he was a good coach.
DeBoer doesn't have it. That's what people miss right now.
DeBoer doesn't want to have it, though. He doesn't care.
Well, yeah, right. Sure,
it obviously doesn't matter to him to win the press conference, right?
He may change his opinion about that sooner or later. But I think that the issue here is the remorse, as you describe it. I mean, I miss going to CD stores to buy a new album. I miss watching cable television sometimes. There's a lot of stuff I miss about things about the world that don't exist anymore and ain't coming back. And guess what?
CD stores.
Nick Saban ain't coming back. It's
make over. Alabama great again.
That part of your life where you were an Alabama fan and Nick Saban was the head coach was great. You should hold those memories in your heart forever, and no one can take it away from you. But it ain't coming back. Listen, so get used to thinking about and judging this program based on the rest of college football and the way things work now. I would say you're doing yourself a disservice if you judge Kalen DeBoer against Nick Saban, because that part of life can't be replicated, and it's not coming back for Alabama or anybody else. So look at what Kalen DeBoer is doing, compare it to the other programs that are elite in college football right now, and ask the question of, is there anybody doing it better than Alabama's doing it right now? That's the fair question to ask. I'm not going to answer it, but that's the question that you need to ask.
Yes, Vanderbilt.
Hey, listen,
no, you make a great point. And the point is this. Alabama fans need to start viewing the SEC as a mini version of the NFL. Okay? Like, if you can wrap your head around that analogy, then you would feel a lot better right now as an Alabama fan, because anyone can win on any given week.
Sure, I agree. It's been incredibly competitive this season, right?
I think it was Clinton Dix who made that point on social media. He was like, this is like a little NFL now. All you need is a win. And that's what it is. The talent is dispersed. And who's even to say that Nick Saban could thrive in this environment? I don't think you have to have a completely different skill set this season compared to last season as a coach.
Yep.
And it's going to be even more challenging next season when even more money comes into the equation. So you have to have a completely different skill set as a coach right now.
But I mean, 2 points there, right? Nick Saban didn't want a part of it. He left. He retired. Mm-hmm. He didn't want this modern college football. He didn't want a piece of it. So he's gone, right? And number two, that's what I mean about a win is a win, right? I mean, it's hard to win in the NFL. That's what you hear all the time. Be glad that you won the game. Same thing in the SEC at this point, right? Be glad that you got that win against South Carolina, because you're going to need it down the road. But I want to go back to Matt's point about how he ain't Nick Saban. That era is over, right? That's something that I think as soon as Nick Saban retired, a lot of people still haven't quite come to terms with, that it's never going to be that good again, right? Probably in their lifetimes. Probably in their lifetimes, right?
I don't know. I wouldn't even put it as that good. I'd just say it's not going to be like that again.
That's as good as it gets, Matt. I mean, there are some people who had that twice in their lifetimes, right? Where so it can happen again. Lightning can strike twice in terms of the right coach at the right program, the right circumstances, etc. But you need to temper your expectations again, Alabama fans, because we've been through this before, right? Think about those 17 years between 1992 and 2009. Think of all those coaches that Alabama rotated through. Think about those dark times that existed. You've done this before. And I know that this is the first season, but Alabama's still 5-1. They got a guy who inherited an amazing program, a guy who's won everywhere he's been. He deserves a little bit of grace in the sense that this is his first season, but the sad part of it is people expect things instantaneously now. Nick Saban, what did he used to call it? Instant coffee, right? Instant gratification. And DeBoer isn't getting the benefit of the doubt right now, and people aren't really remembering lessons like that. So it's tough. It's tough being an Alabama fan, Joe.
Debbie from Young Harris, Georgia, just hold off for one more week. Just
get the violin out.
From the ledge.
Get the violin out for Alabama.
Let me ask you both this question, Joe. I'll start with you. Who's smoking cigars on Saturday?
I'm picking Alabama. Alabama's going to win. They got Jalen Milroe. I mean, to me, you have Jalen Milroe, you're going to have the advantage to win. Now, if he gets down there and messes up at the 3-yard line, I don't know what to tell you, but you get Jalen Milroe, you got Ryan Williams. I mean, those guys are elite of elite. So, yeah, I'm going with Alabama.
Matt, Alabama's better than Arkansas. They're better than Florida. Those teams, one of them beat Tennessee, another nearly beat them this past weekend. But it's on the road. Last time Alabama went to Knoxville, bad things happened. It was a shootout that they couldn't survive. What do you think? Who wins?
I don't feel good about how Alabama's playing right now at all. And I maybe feel even worse about how Tennessee is playing. And I don't cover Tennessee. I'm shocked by it. I think if I have to flip a coin and give somebody the edge, even though it's in one of the most intimidating atmospheres to play in college football, at Tennessee. I'm going to give it to the quarterback that's a little more experienced and has been through some tough games and come out the other side of them. And I will go with Joe here and pick Alabama to win. This is it's not a confident pick for me at all, but I think both of these teams are really something's not right. And I think this could be a sloppy game with a lot of disastrous mistakes for either or both teams. But I like Alabama just because they've got a couple of individual players that I think are potentially the best players on the field.
Now, Matt, let me ask you another question. If Alabama loses, will Tennessee storm the field?
They did it 2 years ago, right?
Yeah,
and
for sure.
Vandy just did it. Normally, if you beat Alabama, you storm the field.
I'll say they will. I'll say they will storm the field if they beat Alabama, because it's apparently just an enormously popular thing to do now if you're a college kid and your team wins an even marginally big game. Like LSU storming the field against Ole Miss last weekend. Storming the field for beating Ole Miss. Ole Miss.
Well, Tennessee just got stormed by Arkansas, right? A couple of weeks ago.
That's a huge win for Arkansas. That's a huge win.
But I just mean they got stormed a couple of weeks ago.
LSU has 3 national championships this century. Ole Miss hasn't won the SEC West ever. That is a shocker to me. But like I said, I think this is just a today's 18 to 22-year-olds. If they have any reason at all to storm the field, they're gonna do it. It looks fun to them, and they want
Clemson behavior, man.
There were Alabama fans storming the field in Nashville after Vandy won. I'm not even lying.
I can't imagine there was a lot of security on the field. It's probably pretty easy to get down there.
But I'm not lying. Some Alabama fans ran out onto the field after Vandy beat Alabama.
Why not? Take a little stroll down there.
Do you think Vandy has a field storming plan in place, or do you think they even expected it and had security down there?
My favorite thing about the Vanderbilt field storming is that everyone in the stadium stormed the field, and it didn't really even fill the field.
It didn't.
Because more than half the stadium was Alabama
up there
fans.
In that press box, riding on deadline, watching these kids trying to take down the field goal post for 15 minutes. I was like, are they going to do it?
They're like YouTubing how to take down field goal posts.
They got the engineers.
How do they do it
out there?
Yeah. Well, I mean, listen.
Anyways, I'm picking Alabama by the smallest of margins. But I'm very fascinated by this game. This is going to be a weird one.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's tough because, first of all, Alabama fans don't understand any of the logic about, storming the fields. They're confused. They don't know when to do it. They've never done it before, and certainly not in our lifetimes. But it's going to be interesting because, I mean, Tennessee has a quarterback who's been wildly inconsistent. He stormed out of the gate first few games, and he has really struggled the past couple. But something tells me this guy's going to play like a god on Saturday in Knoxville. I mean, it just happens to Alabama. It seems these teams, they've got a bullseye on Alabama. It's a special game for them, and these quarterbacks often rise to the occasion. They really do. And so I have to think that Heupel has been circling this one too. And so, I mean, look, it's make or break for both of these teams, right? Again, if you want to be firmly in the college football playoff, you have to win this game. It's a must win. It's a monster win in monster game in college football right now. So it's going to be an amazing atmosphere, probably going to be an amazing game. And I think the kind of interesting thing about this, the Alabama-Tennessee rivalry is heating up again. Like, it was obviously one-sided for so long. Alabama wins, 15, 16 in a row, whatever it was. It was nothing. This generation of fan didn't even understand that Tennessee was a rival at one point. And now, I mean, there's going to be more back and forth here over the next couple of years. And this one has, I think, the potential to be an instant classic. So looking forward to it. All right, guys, he's AL.com sports columnist Joe Goodman. Read his stuff on AL.com. Check out his book, We Want Bama. Joe, thanks for doing this. And he's Beat Everyone producer Matt Scalisi. Appreciate it, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Find Beat Everyone on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. Please subscribe, rate, review, help us out. I'm Ben Flanagan. We'll see you next time. Beat Everyone is brought to you by Broadway Joe's Fantasy Sports, inspired by football legend Joe Namath. Embrace the thrill of daily fantasy sports like never before in a new app coming soon.